As you've indicated, this case has huge implications for the presidency, for the future of the presidency, for the future of the country, in my view. You've referred to the department a few times as having supported the position. Who in the department? Is it the president, the attorney general?
The Solicitor General of the United States. Part of the way in which the special counsel functions is as a component of the Department of Justice. The regulations envision that we reach out and consult, and on a question of this magnitude that involves equities that are far beyond this prosecution as the questions of the court.
So it's the Solicitor General?
Yes.
Okay. Second, like Justice Gorsuch, I'm not focused on the here and now of this case. I'm very concerned about the future. And I think one of the court's biggest mistakes was Morrison versus Olson. Mm-hmm. I think that was a terrible decision for the presidency and for the country, and not because there were bad people who were independent counsels, but President Reagan's administration, President Bush's administration, President Clinton's administration were really hampered,
yes,
in their view, all three, by the independent counsel structure. And what I'm worried about here is that was kind of, let's relax Article 2 a bit for the needs of the moment. And I'm worried about the similar kind of situation applying here. That was a prosecutor investigating a president in each of those circumstances, and someone picked from the opposite party, the current president, usually was how it worked. And Justice Scalia wrote that the fairness of a process must be judged on the basis of what it permits to happen, not what it produced in a particular case. You've emphasized many times regularity of the Department of Justice. And he said, and I think this applied to the independent counsel system, and it could apply if presidents are routinely subject to investigation going forward. One thing is certain, however, it involves investigating and perhaps prosecuting a particular individual. Can one imagine a less equitable manner of fulfilling the executive responsibility to investigate and prosecute? What would the reaction be if, in an area not covered by this statute, the Justice Department posted a public notice inviting applicants to assist in an investigation and possible prosecution of a certain prominent person? Does this not invite what Justice Jackson described as picking the man and then searching the law books or putting investigators to work to pin some offense on him? To be sure, the investigation must relate to the area of criminal offense specified by the statute, but that has often been, and nothing prevents it from being very broad. I paraphrased at the end because it was referring to the judges.
Yes.
That's the concern going forward, is that the system will, when former presidents are subject to prosecution, and the history of Morrison versus Olson tells us it's not going to stop. It's going to cycle back and be used against the current president or the next president and the next president and the next president after that. All that, I want you to try to allay that concern. Why is this not Morrison v. Olson redux if we agree with you?
Well, first of all, the independent counsel regime did have many structural features that emphasized independence at the expense of accountability. We don't have that regime now, but even under that regime, Justice Kavanaugh, I think if you look at Lawrence Walsh's report on Iran-Contra, I think this goes to a very fundamental point for the court to consider. Judge Walsh said, I investigated these matters. The proof did not nearly come close to establishing criminal violations. So we've lived from Watergate through the present, through the independent counsel era with all of its flaws, without these prosecutions having gone off on a runaway train.
Well, I think President Reagan, President Bush, and President Clinton, whether rightly or wrongly, thought contrary to what you just said.
I think nobody likes being investigated for a crime, but it didn't result in the kind of vindictive prosecutions that I think Your Honor is raising as a possibility.
Yeah.
We have a different system now. I think there was a consensus throughout Washington that there were flaws in the independent counsel system. It lapsed. We now are inside the Justice Department with full accountability resting with the Attorney General. So the special counsel regulations now don't operate the way that the independent counsel regulations do. And this court would have something to say about it, I think, if the independent counsel statute were revived. I'm not sure that anybody is in favor of that.
Right. Now, I was just saying this is kind of the mirror image of that is one way someone could perceive it. But I take your point about the different structural protections internally. And like Justice Scalia said, I do not mean to suggest anything of the sort in the present case. I'm not talking about the present case, so I'm talking about the future. Second, another point, you said, talked about the criminal statutes. It's very easy to characterize presidential actions as false or misleading under vague statutes. So President Lyndon Johnson, statements about the Vietnam War. Say something's false. Turns out to be false that he says about the Vietnam War. 371 prosecution
So
after he leaves office?
I think not, but this is an area that I do think that merits some serious and nuanced consideration. Statements that are made by a president to the public are not really coming within the realm of criminal statutes. They've never been prosecuted. I realize that the court can say, well, what if they were? And then I think you get to what I would regard as a hard constitutional question that would probably guide the court away from trying to resolve today, although I do think it's very different from our case and distinguishable in important ways. But you're dealing here with two branches of government that have a paramount interest in the integrity and freedom of their interactions with each other. On the one hand, the president, of course, should be very free to send usually his cabinet officials and sub-cabinet officials to testify to Congress, to provide them with the information needed to enact legislation and to make national policy. And we're very concerned about anything that would trammel that. On the other side of the equation, Congress has a compelling interest in receiving accurate information, and at the very least, not
agree.
Information that is intentionally and knowingly false. Right. That would pollute the legislative process.
How about, I think it came up before, President Ford's pardon. Very controversial in the moment.
Yes.
Hugely unpopular, probably why he lost in '76.
Yes.
Now looked upon as one of the better decisions in presidential history, I think, by most people. If he's thinking about, well, if I grant this pardon to Richard Nixon, could I be investigated myself for obstruction of justice on the theory that I'm interfering with the investigation of Richard Nixon?
So this would fall into that small core area that I mentioned to Justice Kagan and Justice Gorsuch of presidential responsibilities that Congress cannot regulate.
How about President Obama's drone strikes?
So the Office of Legal Counsel looked at this very carefully and determined that, number one, the federal murder statute does apply to the executive branch. The president wasn't personally carrying out the strike, but the aiding and abetting laws are broad. And it determined that a public authority exception that's built into statutes and that applied particularly to the murder statute because it talks about unlawful killing did not apply to the drone strike. So this is actually the way that the system should function. The Department of Justice takes criminal law very seriously. It runs it through the analysis very carefully with established principles. It documents them, it explains them, and then the president can go forward in accordance with it. And there is no risk of prosecution for that course of activity.
Thank you for your answers.